1914. The skies over the Western Front. Before the Great War, nobody truly believed in dogfights. Airplanes were for observation, for scouting the enemy lines. Maybe if you were feeling brave, you'd throw a brick at an enemy pilot, or wave a pistol at him. They were flimsy, glorified kites made of wood, canvas, and piano wire. But the pilots. The pilots. They were different. They were knights of the new, terrifying age, sailing through the cold, lonely sky, far above the mud and blood of the trenches. And they had an idea. A simple, dangerous idea. What if, they thought, we could shoot at each other? And that's where the nightmare began. The problem was terrifyingly simple. The best way to shoot an enemy plane was to aim your entire aircraft at it, to fly straight at it. But there was a giant wooden fan spinning furiously right in front of your face, the propeller. Imagine trying to shoot a fly with a rifle while holding the rifle through the blades of a giant ceiling fan. That was the challenge. The early solutions were desperate, even suicidal. The observer with a rifle. The pilot flew and a second man, the observer, stood up in the rear cockpit trying to aim a bolt-action rifle around the propeller. He usually missed the enemy, often froze in the cold, and occasionally fell out of the plane. The push propeller. Some planes had the engine mounted behind the pilot, pushing the plane forward. No propeller in front. Brilliant. Except these planes were slow, clumsy, and burned in spectacular fireballs when hit. They were flying coffins. The top wing mount. Mount the machine gun on the top wing above the propeller. This worked. But now the pilot couldn't reload it in the air, couldn't clear jams, and couldn't even aim it properly. He had to stand up, lean out, and pray. The Allies tried a solution that was almost an act of madness. The French ace Roland Garros, a national hero, came up with a brilliant idea for his Morin-Saulnier Type L. He bolted steel deflectors onto the propeller blades, thick, angled steel wedges designed to deflect bullets that hit them. It was crude, it was dangerous, and it sort of worked. Bullets that hit the steel would ricochet. Bullets that missed went through. Garros, a skilled pilot, shot down 5 German planes in 2 weeks. He became a legend. But then, on April 18, 1915, his engine was hit by ground fire. Garros crashed behind German lines. He tried to burn his plane, but the Germans got to it first. They captured the plane, and they captured Garros's secret weapon. They captured the Morin-Saulnier with the steel-plated propeller. The Germans, stunned, immediately sent the captured plane to the Fokker Flugzeugwerke factory. There, waiting, was a man named Anthony Fokker. Fokker was a Dutch aviation pioneer, a genius, a maverick, and a ruthless businessman. He was a flamboyant showman, often flying his own creations upside down to impress potential buyers. He was also a German sympathizer who had offered his talents to the Kaiser. The German high command gave him a simple, impossible order. Take this French contraption, improve it, give us a way to shoot through the propeller without the silly deflectors, make our planes kill. Fokker looked at the French deflector system. He shook his head. "This is not how you do it," he muttered. "This is a suicide. Ricocheting bullets could still hit the engine or the pilot. It was a crude, dangerous patch. Fokker had heard whispers of a true solution, a synchronizing gear, a mechanism that would stop the gun from firing when a propeller blade was in the way. It sounded like magic. It sounded like a fool's errand. A timing mechanism so precise, so delicate, it seemed impossible to build for a crude, vibrating, roaring machine like a WWI biplane. But Fokker was not just an engineer. He was a tinkerer. He was a man who loved impossible problems. And he had a single burning goal, to prove that his planes, his designs, were superior. He knew that whoever mastered this impossible trick would dominate the skies, and he was determined that it would be him. April 1915. Fokker Flugzeugwerke, Schwerin, Germany. Anthony Fokker looked at the captured French Morin-Saulnier, its propeller still bearing the scarred steel deflectors. He scoffed. Such a clumsy solution for such a delicate problem. The problem, as Fokker saw it, wasn't just about deflecting bullets. It was about timing. A propeller blade moved incredibly fast. At 1/200 revolutions per minute, each blade passed the firing line of a machine gun hundreds of times per second. A bullet, traveling at over 2,000 feet per second, had to find a gap, and it had to find it every single time. The solution that Fokker envisioned was a synchronizing gear, a mechanical marvel that would interrupt the firing of the machine gun for the fleeting moment a propeller blade crossed its path. It sounded simple in theory, but in practice it was a nightmare. "It is a fool's errand, Herr Fokker," his chief engineer, a stern, methodical German named Oberingenieur Limburger, had declared. "The vibrations alone will destroy any delicate mechanism. the oil, the grime, the G-forces. It is not possible. We should focus on larger guns or better deflectors." Fokker just smiled, a thin, wolfish grin. "Impossible, you say? Good. That is where we begin." He knew about earlier attempts. The Swiss engineer Franz Schneider had patented a synchronizing gear. The Frenchman Raymond Saulnier had built one that almost worked, but it relied on a very specific type of machine gun, the Hotchkiss, that the Germans didn't use. The British, too, were toying with ideas. This wasn't a new concept, but no one had made it work reliably with a standard machine gun. The standard German machine gun was the Parabellum LMG-14, a reliable, belt-fed weapon, but not designed for such precise timing. It was designed to fire continuously, not to be constantly interrupted. Fokker locked himself in his workshop with his two most trusted engineers, Heinrich Lube and Oberingenieur Limburger. Despite his skepticism, Limburger was a brilliant mechanic. They had a captured French plane, a Parabellum machine gun, and a single goal: build a working, synchronizing gear. Their initial attempts were a disaster. Gears jammed, rods snapped, springs broke. The gun would fire prematurely or too late, riddling the propeller with holes. Fokker himself nearly lost a finger during one test when a misfired round sliced through a piece of wood he was holding. "This is madness," Limburger shouted, throwing his wrench down. "We are going to kill ourselves before we kill any Englishmen." Fokker ignored him. He was sketching furiously, his mind racing. The existing designs relied on complex, heavy linkages, wires, and cams. They were too slow, too prone to breaking. He needed something direct, something simple. He stared at the engine, the propeller shaft, turning with immense power. He stared at the machine gun, with its reciprocating bolt. "The propeller is the timer," Fokker suddenly declared, his eyes lighting up. "We must connect the gun directly to the engine." His engineers looked at him as if he were insane. A direct connection? That meant that every single rotation of the propeller, every single pulse of the engine had to trigger or block the gun. It was a brutal, unforgiving mechanism. Fokker's stupid idea was this: a simple cam, a rotating lobe, bolted directly to the propeller shaft. As the shaft turned, the cam would depress a rod. This rod would run all the way to the machine gun, where it would momentarily interrupt the firing mechanism just as a propeller blade crossed the line of fire. When the blade passed, the rod would retract and the gun would fire. It sounded crude. It sounded like it would shake the entire plane apart. It sounded like it would never work reliably at high speeds. It was the mechanical equivalent of building a finely tuned clock out of heavy railroad ties. But Fokker was convinced. He worked day and night, ignoring food and sleep. He personally ground metal, filed gears, and tested springs. He simplified, streamlined, and strengthened every component. Finally, after a frantic 48 hours of nonstop work, they had a prototype, a small, simple, brutal-looking piece of engineering. A metal cam on the propeller shaft, a long, sturdy rod, a lever connected to the machine gun. Fokker himself took the newly modified Fokker EI, Eindecker, monoplane, out for a test flight. He taxied to the end of the field, revved the engine, and took off. The gun was loaded with tracer rounds, its muzzle aimed directly through the propeller arc. He climbed to 1,000 feet. He turned into the wind. He gripped the joystick. He took a deep breath. He pressed the firing button. April 1915, 1,000 feet above the Schwerin airfield. Anthony Fokker, strapped into the cockpit of his modified Fokker EI, felt the raw vibration of the Oberursel engine. Below him, the factory grounds looked like a toy town. Above him, the vast, empty sky. He had personally worked for 48 frantic hours, sacrificing sleep and sanity to install his impossible synchronizing gear. Now was the moment of truth. He pressed the firing button. The Parabellum machine gun roared to life, a short, furious burst of tracers. Fokker held his breath, his eyes glued to the spinning propeller. Each bullet was a tiny, glowing meteor streaking forward. Each propeller blade was a blur of wood and steel. And then, relief. Pure, exhilarating relief. Not a single bullet struck the propeller. The tracers tore through the air, carving a neat, unobstructed path straight ahead, exactly where the nose of the plane was pointing. The impossible had happened. The gun fired, paused, perfectly timed to the rotation of the propeller. Fokker let out a whoop of triumph, a wild, joyous shout that was instantly swallowed by the roar of the engine. He circled the airfield, firing burst after burst, watching the tracers vanish into the distant clouds. He flew back, landing with a flourish, pulling off his goggles with a triumphant grin. His engineers, Limburger and Lube, rushed to the plane, their faces pale with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They meticulously inspected the propeller. Not a single mark, not a single scratch. It works, Herr Fokker," Lineberger stammered, his earlier skepticism completely vanished, replaced by genuine shock. "It actually works." Fokker just clapped him on the back. "Of course it works, Oberingenieur. I told you, impossible is only a word." His stupid idea, that crude direct mechanical link between the propeller shaft and the machine gun, was a stroke of genius. It was brutally simple. A rotating cam on the propeller shaft momentarily actuated a push rod, which briefly disengaged the gun's firing pin mechanism. The gun would only fire when the cam allowed it, precisely in the gaps between the blades. The German high command was, predictably, skeptical. They had seen many miracle weapons that failed. They demanded a full demonstration. On May 23, 1915, Anthony Fokker himself flew the EI demonstration plane for a group of high-ranking generals, including none other than the legendary General Erich von Falkenhayn, chief of the German General Staff. Fokker, ever the showman, performed dazzling aerobatics, looping and rolling, all while intermittently firing his machine gun, showing the generals the continuous, unobstructed stream of bullets. The generals were silent. They exchanged grave glances. They understood the implications immediately. This wasn't just an improvement. It was a revolution. This simple mechanical trick had transformed the airplane from a fragile scout into a lethal weapon. But Fokker, being Fokker, had one more trick up his sleeve. He then landed the plane, jumped out, and personally invited General Falkenhayn to sit in the cockpit. "See for yourself, General," he declared with a flourish. He explained the mechanism in simple terms, allowing the general to press the firing button and watch the cam operate, illustrating how the gun stopped when he slowly turned the propeller blade by hand. Falkenhayn, a hardened veteran, was visibly impressed. He clapped Fokker on the shoulder. "Herr Fokker," he said, his voice grave, "you have changed the face of aerial warfare." The order came swiftly. Every single Fokker Eindecker in production was to be fitted with this new synchronizing gear. Fokker's factory, once a small operation, was suddenly working around the clock. The German air service, previously struggling to gain air superiority, was about to be given an unprecedented advantage. The impact was immediate and devastating. Within weeks, the first Fokker Eindeckers, armed with this impossible trick, were deployed to the Western Front. The Allied pilots, who had grown accustomed to the gentlemanly aerial combat of pistols and bricks, were about to experience a nightmare. The skies were about to turn deadly. Summer 1915. The skies over the Western Front. The impact of Fokker's impossible gear trick was immediate and brutal. Allied pilots, who had grown accustomed to the gentlemanly aerial combat of waving pistols and sporadic rifle fire, were suddenly confronted by a terrifying new reality. The first reports began to trickle back, then a flood. British and French reconnaissance planes, previously able to observe German lines with relative impunity, were being shot down with alarming regularity. Not just shot down, but annihilated. Pilots would return, wide-eyed and shaken, describing ghostly German monoplanes that seemed to fly straight at them, their machine guns spitting a continuous, unwavering stream of lead. "They shoot right through their own propellers," one traumatized French pilot reportedly exclaimed, convinced he had witnessed black magic or some devilish German invention beyond comprehension. "It is impossible." This new, terrifying phase of aerial warfare became known as the Fokker Scourge, Fokker Plage. The German pilots, now armed with the devastatingly effective synchronized machine gun, held an unprecedented advantage. They could aim their entire aircraft, nose first, directly at their targets, delivering a concentrated burst of fire that Allied aircraft simply couldn't survive. Pilots like Oswald Bölke, Max Immelmann, who earned the nickname Eagle of Lille, and later Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, became legends thanks to the Fokker Eindecker and its synchronized gun. They developed new tactics, no longer needing to outmaneuver an enemy to get a shot around the propeller, but simply to get behind them and open fire. The effect on Allied morale was devastating. Their reconnaissance missions became suicide runs. Their bombing raids were decimated. The skies, once a playground for daring individual feats, became a hunting ground dominated by German aces and their deadly Eindeckers. For months, the Allies tried to figure out the secret. They speculated wildly. Were the Germans using some new, super-fast bullet that warped around the propeller blades? Did they have some kind of hardened steel propeller that simply shrugged off bullets? Was it a new, magical machine gun that could predict the propeller's rotation? They captured downed Fokker Eindeckers, but the synchronizing gear was often too badly damaged to understand immediately, or German ground crews would hastily destroy it. The simplicity of Fokker's cam and rod mechanism was so brutal, so direct, that it defied the complex theories the Allied engineers were developing. The impossible trick was not some elaborate, futuristic invention. It was a mechanical, almost crude, stroke of genius. It was pure Anthony Fokker, direct, efficient, and ruthlessly effective. The Allies were forced to fly older, less capable push-propeller aircraft for defensive patrols, accepting their slower speeds and vulnerability in order to simply mount a forward-firing gun. They rushed their own attempts at synchronizing gears into production, but these early Allied designs were often unreliable, prone to jamming, or even more prone to shooting off a propeller than Fokkers. The Fokker Scourge wasn't just about German technical superiority, it was about the profound psychological impact of an unseen, unbeatable advantage. It transformed the rules of engagement. From this point forward, the airplane was no longer just a scout or a bomber, it was an efficient, deadly weapon of war. The era of the true fighter plane had begun, all thanks to one engineer's stupid gear trick. But history rarely allows one side to hold an advantage forever. The Allies, shocked and desperate, were already working furiously to counter Fokker's deadly innovation. Late 1915, early 1916, Allied airfields on the Western Front. The Fokker Scourge could not last forever. Allied pilots and engineers, pushed to their breaking point by the relentless German superiority, worked with desperate urgency to develop their own synchronized firing mechanisms. The pressure was immense. Every downed reconnaissance plane, every lost bomber was a stark reminder of the technological gap. While the Germans continued to dominate the skies with their Fokker Eindeckers, Allied workshops buzzed with frantic experimentation. They studied fragments of downed German planes, interviewed captured pilots, and pored over vague reports. The prevailing wisdom among Allied engineers was that the German system must be incredibly complex, a masterpiece of clockwork precision. They tried various approaches, hydraulic systems, using fluid pressure to time the gun. These were often too slow and unreliable in the extreme temperatures and vibrations of flight. Electric systems, using electrical pulses to trigger the gun. These were prone to shorts and interference, and batteries were heavy. Complex cam systems, more intricate versions of what Fokker had actually built, but often over-engineered, leading to jams and breakages. Many of these early Allied synchronizers were disastrous. Propellers were shot off with alarming regularity, sometimes even before the plane left the ground during test firing. Pilots were understandably wary of trusting their lives and their propellers to these temperamental devices. The fear of shooting off one's own propeller or having the gun jam at a critical moment was almost as great as the fear of a Fokker Eindecker. However, driven by necessity, progress was made. The British developed several early synchronizing gears, notably the Vickers Challenger gear and later the more successful Constantinesco gear. These systems were often more complex than Fokker's brutal simplicity, but they eventually achieved a similar, if sometimes less robust, result. The French, too, pressed forward. Their engineers, particularly those working on the Morane-Saulnier and Nieuport aircraft, quickly abandoned the deflector plate idea, which had proven only marginally effective and highly dangerous, in favor of mechanical synchronization. The turning point came when the Allies finally captured an intact Fokker E-3 in April 1916, thanks to a pilot who got lost in thick fog and landed behind British lines. The intact synchronizing gear, a simple Kamen rod system, was immediately studied. The Allied engineers were almost embarrassed by its sheer, elegant simplicity. It wasn't clockwork magic, it was just clever mechanics. With the secret revealed, Allied production surged. Factories began mass-producing their own synchronized fighter planes. The legendary Nieuport 11 Baby, a nimble French biplane, was soon fitted with its own reliable synchronizing gear. The British introduced new fighters like the Airco DH-2 and the FE-2B, though these still largely relied on a pusher configuration, engine behind pilot, to avoid the synchronization issue entirely. But it was the arrival of truly effective, synchronized Allied fighters that marked the end of the Fokker Scourge. The balance of power in the skies began to shift. The German aces, who had enjoyed months of unchallenged superiority, suddenly found themselves facing equally armed and often more agile opponents. The advantage granted by Fokker's impossible gear trick had been countered. Aerial combat evolved again, moving beyond the initial shock and awe into a more balanced, intense, and deadly struggle. The synchronized machine gun, once a revolutionary secret, became the standard for all fighter aircraft, cementing its place as one of the most critical innovations of World War I aviation. The skies were now open to every pilot who dared to claim them, no longer just to those with a trick up their sleeve. 1917, 1918, the evolving skies of the Western Front and beyond. By mid-1916, the Fokker Scourge was largely over. The Allies, having finally cracked the secret of synchronized firing, were producing their own formidable fighters. The skies above the Western Front became a deadly arena of balanced technological prowess. No longer could one side claim unchallenged aerial superiority based solely on a hidden trick. But the legacy of Anthony Fokker's impossible gear trick resonated far beyond its initial tactical advantage. It fundamentally reshaped the very concept of a fighter aircraft. Before Fokker, an airplane was a platform. After Fokker, it was a weapon system. The synchronized machine gun became the undisputed standard for all future fighter designs, a core component that no aviation engineer could ignore. Every nation that entered the aerial fray of World War I adopted and refined the concept. Germany continued to develop increasingly sophisticated Eindeckers, then biplanes like the Albatros D-30s and Fokker WWI, the famous Red Baron's triplane, all featuring multiple synchronized machine guns. Fokker's initial crude cam and rod system was refined into elegant, reliable mechanisms that allowed for devastating firepower. Britain, their SE-5A and Sopwith Camel, iconic fighters, relied on synchronized Vickers machine guns, turning them into formidable aerial combatants. The Camel, with its twin synchronized guns, was particularly lethal in the hands of skilled pilots. France, aircraft like the Spad S-7 and St mounted synchronized Vickers guns, giving their aces the firepower needed to challenge the Germans. The synchronizing gear allowed for true forward-firing armament. This meant precision. Pilots could aim the entire aircraft at the target, ensuring accurate and concentrated fire. Firepower. Multiple machine guns could be mounted, unleashing a devastating hail of bullets. Pilot focus. The pilot no longer had to worry about aiming a separate gun or hitting their own propeller. Their entire attention could be on flying and fighting. This shift was profound. Aerial tactics evolved from individual acts of bravery and opportunistic potshots to organized formations and intricate dogfights. Aces became national heroes, celebrated for their skill in leveraging this new, deadly technology. The synchronized gun wasn't just a part, it was the heart of the fighter plane. Anthony Fokker, the flamboyant Dutch engineer, went on to design many more successful aircraft for Germany during the war. His name became synonymous with advanced aircraft design, and his factory flourished. After the war, he shrewdly smuggled vast quantities of aircraft and parts out of Germany, establishing a successful aviation empire in the Netherlands and later in the United States. His life was a testament to his audacity and ingenuity, but the true genius of Fokker's stupid gear trick wasn't its complexity. It was its elegant simplicity and its transformative power. In an era of rapid technological advancement, where new inventions were constantly being deployed, Fokker's solution stood out. It addressed a seemingly impossible problem with a direct, mechanical answer, changing the entire trajectory of aerial warfare. The lessons learned from the Fokker Scourge and the subsequent race for air superiority continued to influence aircraft design for decades. The idea of integrating armament directly into the airframe, controlled by the pilot with precision, became a foundational principle for every fighter jet, every attack helicopter, and every armed drone that followed. The roar of the synchronized machine gun in the skies of 1915 laid the groundwork for all future aerial dominance. 1920s, present day. The enduring impact of a simple idea. The First World War ended, but the legacy of Anthony Fokker's impossible gear trick, the synchronized machine gun, lived on. It wasn't just a wartime innovation, it was a foundational principle that shaped the future of all armed aviation. In the decades that followed, aircraft design evolved at an astonishing pace. Biplanes gave way to monoplanes, wood and fabric to metal, piston engines to jets. Speeds increased dramatically, and firepower became ever more devastating. Yet through all these revolutionary changes, one core concept, pioneered by Fokker, remained constant: the ability to aim and fire directly forward through the plane's own rotating or operating components. The basic principle of synchronization was adapted and refined. World War II fighters, iconic aircraft like the Supermarine Spitfire, Messerschmitt Bf-109, P-51 Mustang, and FW-190 all relied on synchronized machine guns and cannons. The firing rates increased, the calibers grew, but the fundamental idea, interrupting fire to avoid striking the propeller, remained essential for propeller-driven aircraft. The synchronization systems became more advanced, often hydraulic or electric, but the purpose was the same. Bullets flew freely while blades turned safely. Jet age, armament. Even with the advent of jet engines, which eliminated the propeller, the principle of integrating forward-firing armament directly into the airframe, controlled precisely by the pilot, was a direct descendant of Fokker's work. Whether it was the cannons on a MiG-15 or the Gatling guns on an F-16, the pilot's ability to point and shoot the entire aircraft was a lesson learned from the Fokker Eindecker. Fokker's contribution wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about defining a new paradigm. He took a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, a spinning propeller blocking the line of fire, and found a brilliantly simple mechanical solution. His stupid gear trick showed that apparent limitations could be overcome with ingenuity, turning a weakness into an overwhelming strength. This single invention created the true fighter plane. Before, they were armed scouts. After, they were dedicated aerial hunters. Forced rapid innovation. The Fokker scourge ignited a technological arms race that accelerated aviation development for decades. Established tactical principles. The idea of forward-firing armament dictated how pilots would dogfight, how they would engage, and how they would try to outmaneuver their opponents. Anthony Fokker, the genius showman who almost lost a finger inventing it, passed away in 1939, just as World War II was beginning. He lived long enough to see his impossible trick become a universal standard, transforming warfare from the mud of the trenches to the vast, open skies. His name, forever linked to that first deadly dance of synchronized bullets and spinning propellers, remains a testament to how one audacious engineer, faced with a problem everyone called madness, could unlock a revolution. So here's my question to you. What other impossible problems, in war or in peace, are waiting for a brutally simple, stupid trick to unlock an entirely new future? When does daring simplicity triumph over complex impossibility? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.